back to the Dan Corder Show. South Africa is a movie.
Welcome to the watch party!
We are so lucky now to have one massive interview for the rest of the show, and it comes with perfect timing because we've all been watching with our jaws on the floor at all the different new and breaking allegations and revelations at the Madlanga Commission, from General Mkhwanazi, from Fani Masemola National Police Commissioner just today, and we've been hearing all of these allegations about corruption and vested interests and manipulating the police force and rich and powerful business people getting away with literal murder and politicians politically interfering to protect their friends. And so it's the perfect time to remember one of the most awful moments in our recent history of somebody who was just doing their job, literally losing her life for it. South Africa has become all too used to auditors in municipalities and whistleblowers in organizations being physically threatened and sometimes killed for just doing their jobs, which is reporting when something fishy is going on. And one of the worst cases of that is the Tembisa Hospital case, where at minimum 2.3 billion rands worth of monies in tenders and dodgy contracts were allegedly stolen or manipulated out of the right hands into the wrong hands, involving a lot of very powerful and connected people. But Babita Deokaran was the person who blew the whistle on that, and then she was killed. And one of South Africa's, just for me, best investigative journalists and crime journalist, Jeff Wicks, has just written and released a book that you really need to read. It's not just about Babita, it's not just about Tembisa, it's about everything that we are seeing about whether or not a complex and well-developed criminal network and mafia state essentially runs this country. And so that's why I'm so thrilled to tell you that for the rest of this show, you're not going to be listening to me, you're going to be listening to Jeff Wicks, who's here, everybody. Thank you so much. Now, when I have someone like you on the show, the first thing I have to ask is, did I tell any lies in that introduction, or was I right?
No, I think for the most part you bang on, but we can get into it in the next two segments.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to talk about the Madlanga Commission, the revelations so far, how it connects with a lot of your and your colleagues' works in the next few minutes. But I want to start with the shadow state and the story of Babita Deokaran, one which I think more people should know about and not enough people do know about it. So could you essentially give us the spark notes, the most important needs to know, as is told in your book, The Shadow State?
So, I mean, I think fundamentally, Dan, the story is about Babita Deokaran and her sacrifice. And she's become sort of synonymous with heroism and good civil servantry in death. But in life, she was essentially abandoned, and she became a victim of a corrupt state and a broken system. So the book is really a tribute to her sacrifice, but not only as a civil servant, but as a human being. I mean, we have to look at the way we frame corruption as a victimless crime, because it's just state money that's bottomless, that is just consistently pulled out of the fiscus. But Babita is an example of the deadly cost of it. She stood against it, and she was murdered 19 days after reporting her concerns. And it's something, as you correctly said, we've seen over and over again. Anyone who is in law enforcement or adjacent to it, with the commonality only that they are standing up to corruption, becomes a target, and they're no longer protected by status. Babita Deokaran is one of the first manifest examples of that.
Yep. So just in the last 2 weeks, we have seen some very significant people who allegedly stole hundreds of millions of rands, like the tune of $500 million around each, from the Tembisa Hospital, alleged still, tender scandal. One of them had luxury mansions, cars, and a party boat confiscated last week by the Asset Forfeiture Unit. So it feels like a lot of things are coming to head at once. But what at core, according to Babita's reporting, or what she discovered, what went wrong, what happened, what crimes were allegedly committed at Tembisa Hospital?
So I think that when we consider what happened at Tembisa, Babita had stumbled onto the first shades of what is a really insidious extraction network. She'd come across anomalous payment patterns and identified over 200 companies that she felt needed further scrutiny. That was 4 years ago.
Sorry, they were all allegedly or supposed to be providing services to the hospital.
All selling medical goods, be it surgical drapes or needles or syringes or ventilators or hospital beds, a whole range of items. But the issue wasn't that Tembisa Hospital was buying these goods, it's the volume that they were buying. They essentially executed 850 million rands worth of payments in the space of 4 months, and that's its budget several times over. So she reported her concerns concerns on that score. What we now know is that it's much bigger than that. Hundreds of entities in a money laundering enterprise, 2.3 billion rand extracted in total, and that's just from one facility in 2 years. As you said, one of the main syndicate bosses had his assets frozen last week. That does represent some sort of progress, but then again, we are 4 years on from this. She was assassinated in August 2021. And if we want to make claims about acting against complex money laundering syndicates and commercial crime, is 4 years really a good enough turnaround to get some sort of justice? And bear in mind, that's just the first stage of justice, preserving these assets, and that's 4 years on.
So what was the hardest thing about writing this book, given that I'm sure a lot of people felt personally in danger of talking about Babita on or even off the record, considering what happened to her? And considering, I mean, I don't know if you guys know this, but one of the people whose assets was frozen last week is the nephew by marriage of the president. Now, he says that I've never met this gentleman, I don't know this gentleman. He said that in Parliament. And it was the nephew by a former marriage, so no blood. But just so you understand the world in which we are moving here.
So many people we looked at in investigating this, and bear in mind, this has been a 4-year investigation. So it's not only the book, but advancing this investigation over time has been challenging. Of course, danger was one of the considerations. We knew once we had Babita's report that we inherited the danger that she faced, because someone had essentially silenced her for that. She files a report, 19 days later she's dead, and the money she tried to freeze is then unfrozen and paid out. So we didn't take that lightly. We knew we were going to step on some dangerous toes, and that's what we've tried to do for the past years, is follow the money and show everyone where the cash extracted from Tembisa Hospital actually went, because that's the root issue here, is that you've got 2.3 billion rand taken away from millions of poor, indigent and infirm people, being diverted to a handful of very wealthy men to make them even wealthier. And that's sort of the key trope of the book, and the key trope of what Babita found early on.
So how does an investigative journalist or team of journalists go about this kind of investigation? I've spoken to many investigative journalists, one of whom has actually just released his own book with Paulie van Wyk, Mike already, and I was asking, like, what is the boring drudge of being an investigative journalist? Is a lot of it just like trying to force some or other financial entity to give you the records of a transaction, or is it making mysterious phone calls to people and meeting people like Peter Louis Myburgh did and trying to get someone off the record to say something they shouldn't?
It all goes into this wonderful melting pot and grey melting pot that is investigative journalism. But fundamentally, you start with a thesis. I want to prove this. And then you have to set out to then go and find the documents you need and find the deep throat sources that you need to confirm it. And we often take the long road. I mean, this book is a case in point. It was written in a relatively short space of time, but doing the research took 4 years. And it's a story that will continue to remain on my diary and continue to haunt my steps as we move forward.
How was Babita failed after she submitted her report and tried to freeze all of this money and flagged all of these irregularities? How was she failed by the state? How was she failed arguably by the hospital? What went wrong?
I think she's been failed in so many respects. She was failed by the Gauteng Health Department for failing to act on her report. In fact, it was suppressed and buried. If it wasn't for us and our work, they would have not even acknowledged its existence. She's been failed by the Hawks in their shortcomings in terms of her murder investigation. That case has gone cold. We know and have been able to prove that they purposefully did not look at digital forensic evidence and cast it aside, which beggars belief. And then she's been failed by the state because nothing really has changed since she was killed. I thought her murder would be a catalyst for whistleblower protection, and there would be reforms and there'd be action on the part of Gauteng Department of Health. Unfortunately, that's not happened.
It's interesting that we got quite a few American guests in the crowd today, something that I've thought about a lot, and I was involved in like an anti-corruption summit hosted by the University of Johannesburg last year, and they were talking a lot about what we need to do for whistleblowers in South Africa. The fact that the South African state does not very often look after them, does not put them into reliable witness protection, does not look after their families particularly well, does not make sure that they're safe. In fact, so many people separately being terrified that Mkhwanazi is going to be killed right now, despite being a KZN police chief, is a testament to that too. And in America, they obviously have a financial incentives, a rewards program for whistleblowers, where if you blow the whistle on something and it turns out that you were right, you actually stand to take a percentage of the recovered monies as a financial reward. And I've heard so many whistleblowers and advocates of whistleblowers in South Africa talk about the fact that if you blow the whistle, you have financial destitution. You're going to lose your job. You're going to struggle to get another job. How are you going to provide for your family? All of these things. from what you have read and from what you have written, what do you think needs to happen first in South Africa to help whistleblowers better?
I think we should, and will be somewhat controversial, we need to negate the need for whistleblowers. I mean, if you look at corruption, and it's unyielding in the way we're assailed with it, constantly, week in and week out, there's issues around procurement and misspending. If you look at state procurement, that's 1.25 billion rand per year at the state trough. So it makes you understand why it's targeted. And then the controls around state procurement are so lax that you have this misspending because it's enabled by a broken system. We need to professionalize the civil service. We need to bring the way we procure goods and services into this century, because right now we use a paper-based system that's circa 2005. And if we can cut off corruption at the knees, we may not need further Babita Deokarans. Not to say that reforms in terms of whistleblower protection aren't important, but let's go to the root instead of trying to address a symptom.
It's very much a symptom. Yeah, exactly. So I have been worried about this for a long time. I've spoken to other journalists about this. Like, did you feel in danger doing this work? Because I know that we have this mysterious situation in this country where auditors are being killed, whistleblowers are being killed, people are being threatened. But for now, journalists are not ending up in trouble. But the more that journalists are the reason, for example, that this wasn't covered up or buried, as you say, the more I feel like journalists are going to get in trouble.
It's something I've grappled with as well, and speaking to colleagues, I think what history has taught us is that whether you're a police officer, an auditor, a liquidator, a lawyer, you are no longer protected by status. If you are somehow an obstacle or a bulwark for misspending or corruption or wrongdoing, you find yourself in danger. And there's no longer a situation where you are too prominent a target for people to take you on, because we've seen like the likes of Boa Finikirk and Thomas and Clutter Murray, who have been assassinated brazenly in broad daylight and in their offices. So I mean, I hate to be fatalist or a pessimist in my thinking, but it makes me wonder, will there come a time where a journalist is assassinated? And nothing stops that from happening. We understand the terrain that we operate in. It's fraught terrain, not only with threats and intimidation, but actual, physical violence, or at least the threat of physical violence. So of course, there are times where I'm scared. I think it's a normal reaction to a bit of a difficult situation that we find ourselves in, that we are somewhat exposed and unprotected. And we are now taking what people want to remain hidden and placing it on full view for the public to decide what's right and what's wrong.
And then there's something else that happens to journalists which is softer, which is that there are bot networks on particularly the dark place formerly known as Twitter, which are clearly paid for campaigns of anonymous accounts that are programmed to try and harass, bully journalists, destroy their mental health, destroy their reputations. We saw an extraordinary lashing out against journalists this weekend for just reporting on the Madlanga Commission, very fairly in my opinion. And I know the toll that it takes on journalists. It must be a hellscape for people like you to go online right now and see, because I know that over half of Twitter in many countries in the world now is bots. Like over half of it is not real people. But Twitter is still the place where so many people think the real news and the real dialogue happens when it just doesn't.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, and you touched on it now, Twitter is not a real place, or X is not a real place. It's completely imaginary. So any sort of mental health struggles I would suffer from, getting pilloried on Twitter, and I had it this weekend as well, telling me how useless I am, I should be fired, I'm clearly a bought journalist. It's not a real place. So if you simply don't look at it, then you are much happier. So I think that's the take home. And what we must do as journalists, and it speaks to what's happening at the Madlanga Commission now, is all we must do is we must bring facts to the table. Totally. And what we've seen recently is this, this emergence of something of an Mkhwanazi cult, and taking issue with him being questioned. But what people must understand is that no one is above being questioned or criticized by journalists in this country, nor should they be, because that is a pillar of a functioning democracy, is being able to do that. And we should continue to do that because this commission is so important to our law enforcement and democratic landscape.
Totally.
It can't be understated.
And I think that's an interesting point, because once you make someone a hero, you believe what they say on faith, and you don't require them to provide the level of evidence for claims that they make that you expect of other people. And I feel like everyone knew this was going to happen in this commission, because South Africa was crying out for a hero, and Mkhwanazi might be a hero, but he might not be, but he was the hero in that press conference and has upset so many people. And we always knew that he would say a lot at the beginning of the commission, then all kinds of people would try to disagree with him because he called them out on stuff and they'd want to defend themselves. And that's a very natural part of the process. I'm here with Jeff Wicks, the author of the new book, The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die. Jeff has dedicated a lot of his career, particularly in recent years, to investigating the extraordinary criminal network influence over our politics, our business, and our police service. So while you go and buy this online or figure out which bookstore near you has it in stock still so you can go and read it yourself, The Shadow State, we're going to speak with Jeff Wicks more about the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. It's actually quite a cool moment to talk to you now, just so happens, because I know that Fanny Masemola spoke today, but what people were really interested in was the first 3 days, Wednesday to Friday last week, where General Mkhwanazi would take the stand and speak more on the explosive allegations that he put out in July earlier this year. He said a lot that he had already said, sometimes in even more extreme and strong language, like saying that current police minister on special leave, Senzo Mchunu, is fully involved in a criminal syndicate, that he was irrational, and that he chose to try and disband the political killings task team 24 hours after the task team got a ballistics report that linked Armand Swart, the engineer's murder, to a bunch of other high-profile cases. But there were a lot of other things that pulled in so many people. We showed that board earlier. There's politicians from all these parties. There's Diane Barnard, a DA MP many people have never heard of before. There's Fadil Adams from the NCC, a party many people have never heard of before. And it feels so wide-ranging now that I'd love to hear, after those first 3 days and with a full weekend to digest it a little, what your top-line thoughts were from those first 3 days of testimony at the commission from Mkhwanazi.
So I think let me start by saying the importance of this commission, it's patent. We need urgent reforms in the way our police operate, in the way that they're structured, and the way in which corruption has been allowed to infiltrate the ranks. So this commission is absolutely necessary. And, I was looking forward to the Lieutenant General's testimony. And indeed, he repeated a lot of things that he first revealed in his press briefing from June. What's interesting to me is that there seems to be a heavy reliance on, he will say things like, I'm just here to bring the facts. But he will interweave that with his opinion. So there seems to be a lot of conflation in the conclusion that he draws, or the conclusions that he's drawn. And I think the take-home, and which elements of the Fourth Estate have been at pains to point out, is that a lot of what he's testified to so far is hearsay. And we have this constant refrain where the team will come later and these details will be provided in camera. That's important. It was important to have that at the beginning, so that there is no doubt about the veracity of evidence, or people will come and corroborate me later. It's strange in the way that they've gone about it. But that said, I think it's a seminal moment in our democracy. Whether or not Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi emerges as the hero he went in as remains to be seen. But it's important for our country and for forging a path forward in which the police deliver on their constitutional mandate, and that is to safeguard us against criminals and crime.
Totally. Another perspective on Mkhwanazi not getting bogged down in all the evidence initially and saying the team will bring it later is that I think he probably wanted to lay out everything that he wanted us to expect to happen. He wanted to define the unfolding of the commission on his terms, and that may have been his incentive to, in the first 3 days, just move as quickly as possible as he did. I agree that this is a massive moment because this is fundamentally about the ANC. It's about factions within the ANC fighting with each other at a time where the ANC can't take another reputational hit, given that they are staring down the barrel of maybe not winning a majority, not getting close to a majority, but not even just being the biggest party in the 2029 national election and even the local one in 2026. So I think it is huge. But Jeff Wicks, there are some names that are all over our board that are deeply connected to work that you've done in the past. Vusimusi Katmatlala is currently in jail on money laundering charges and attempting to he's on trial rather, for attempting allegedly to assassinate his ex-girlfriend and money laundering charges. He is interwoven with many things, but also with the Tembisa hospital case. How much of your work that you've put into this book, Shadow State, as well as other investigations that you've done, is now coming out in the wash of this commission?
It's quite remarkable to see, actually. And when I watched the Lieutenant General's press conference, I sat there with bated breath, because you heard the names like Kat Matlala and Katie Molefe, people we've been looking at for years, and now who are suddenly thrust to the fore, certainly in terms of the public's eyes. But we've been working on these people for years. Someone like Kat Matlala, he was first flagged by Babita Deokaran in 2021. She is the only reason why he was on anyone's radar. And he was certainly, he was a point of focus for us coming out of the Tembisa Hospital investigation, and then looking at his new cash windfall via the SAPS, the same organization that's supposedly investigating him. When we think about Katie Molefe, we've been following Armand Swart's assassination from the 17th of April last year. So now to all of a sudden have these people made important by Mkhwanazi, I think it's key. And a lot of these people feature in the book. And when you consider someone like Kat Matlala, you know, he's essentially become a bridge between what is the alleged criminal underworld and our political sphere. And I think the take-home, at least from the first couple of days of testimony, the nature of the evidence aside, is that what Mkhwanazi has made clear is that politics and policing have become completely intertwined. There cannot be any doubt about that anymore. And I think that's what should scare us the most. We know from the Zondo Commission that, you know, the police were politicized to achieve certain political ends. What has changed since then? Clearly very little, because even if Mkhwanazi is half right about what he's saying, it's a glaring indictment on the way politics has become to, or grown to a point where it can wield influence over our law enforcement, and lines have become blurred.
Totally. And this is now a police civil war without traditional violence, right? And that's another reason why this commission is so different than anything we've seen before, because now the mutually assured destruction is gone. Before, everyone had dirt on each other but wouldn't talk about it. Now, Mkhwanazi's like, I'm going to talk about all of you guys. And they're going to come back and talk about him back. And there's going to be this civil war about who wins, ultimately, the police service that will hopefully end up in trials and hopefully end up in convictions. But I don't know how a police civil war ends, because I don't know that we've ever had a police civil war in this country. And there aren't many which are so explicitly, factionally fighting each other, trying to destroy each other. This very rarely happens in any country in the world ever. And so I want to know where you think this might end. I'm not asking you to place a bet or say what's most probable, but how do you think the commission will unfold from here?
I think we must understand that police faction fighting has played out in the shadows for decades. It's only now that it's being live streamed to us, and we can see it. And what Mkhwanazi's testimony did was also give us a clear idea of where the camps have been, where battle lines have been drawn, and who's in which camp. What remains to be seen is whether or not there are any winners in any of this. My point of view is that, you know, the rot extends from the very station level cops all the way up to the top in the police. We understand just from empirical data that they cannot actually deliver on their constitutional mandate. So we do need reforms. What those reforms look like, thankfully, there's people with degrees and doctorates and PhDs in criminology that get to take that over and bear that responsibility. My job as a journalist is to tell you where the bodies are, tell you where to look, and tell you what the truth is so that people can go make those decisions.
But there has to be political will to change a police service. There has to be the drive from a political party that's been elected in a majority to do that. And that's why I think this situation is so different. Because if for the first time ever the ANC thinks they actually have to do good to get votes, then maybe they will see an incentive to do so in this case. And you mentioned like experts with degrees. I have been speaking to so many people like Gareth Newham, who's just actually been appointed as a special advisor to Feroz Kochali, the acting police minister, and he has said, we had the Khayelitsha Commission, we had the Marikana Commission, we know what we need to do. It's just whether or not it gets implemented, which is so frustrating. Now, Jeff Wicks, what do you do after you've written a book like this? Are there just 9 more open tabs of 9 more books or investigations to go?
So this has been interesting because I finished this book, but our investigation into Matlala is just only starting to gain purchase now.
There's more stuff coming out right now.
So that will continue. But I mean, as an investigative journalist, and you can ask others you speak to, we've all got lists of things we plan on getting to next week. That list started 5 years ago when I started this job and just has kept growing since then. So the work is not yet done. Certainly not on the Babita Deokaran front, because we still have people's feet to hold to the fire, because there's not yet been accountability, there's not yet been justice, and we have a role to play in securing that. beyond that, we look to the greater issues around Kat Matlala and Katie Molefe and now our imploding police force. That's where we're putting our attention. But this is only one societal issue that we're tasked with. You know, we need more journalists. We need more journalists to take these on because in as much as I'm busy, so are my colleagues, and we all have different focus areas.
Totally.
So it's unending, but we'll go forward unto the breach as best we can.
Something I found interesting that you said earlier is that it was so nice that the commission is happening because people you've been talking about for years were suddenly getting heat. And I think that South Africans are so overwhelmed. I always joke with people, I'm so overwhelmed by the endless corruption stories that if someone hasn't stolen 8 figures, I'm not going to learn their name. It's not a big enough number unless it's like 100 million or more. It's not worth learning their name because there's so many much bigger stories. But I think along with South Africa needs more journalists, South Africa needs more people, citizens, to obsessively care about our journalists' stories, to not just watch European or American or like Chinese news, but to go, this is happening in our country, and our attention is actually the fuel that will cause consequences, because a journalist putting out their work with no audience, it's not going to have any impact on the real world whatsoever. And so you guys actually need the people watching us right now to care about and to champion the work that you guys expose, I guess.
Absolutely. I think ignorance is a choice. Really, and you see it a lot on places like Twitter where you know we're told like this will be the new news organization, citizen-led, and I have to have a chuckle because it just simply doesn't work like that. But people can empower themselves to know more, and you can choose to keep yourself in the dark or not. And I think fundamentally that's as part of an inclusive and participatory society where we all must understand what is happening around us to equip us to make decisions. That's fundamentally why I do my job, to be able to equip people to say, well, to make their choices and understand where to vote every time elections roll around.
Jeff Wicks, final question. Does this Madlanga Commission actually give you that very, very elusive thing in South African journalism that we all need? Hope.
No, I've learned a long time ago there's very little reason to be hopeful. But that's my cynical nature as a journalist. I will never be hopeful. I will continue to ask questions and be judgmental every step of the way, and I hope to be proven wrong.
Okay, well, that's why we need people like you. Make some noise for Jeff Wicks, everybody. Jeff Wicks' new book, The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die, is out now. Go get your copy. And that's our show. Thank you so much for watching.